Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the twisted world of ancient beauty, where looking good literally meant dying slowly. Picture this. You're standing in front of a polished bronze mirror in ancient Egypt, carefully applying what you think is harmless eye makeup, but you're actually painting your eyelids with a substance that will slowly poison your brain. The coal sliding across your skin contains enough lead to kill a small animal, and you probably won't survive this beauty routine if you keep it up for more than a few years. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing where this journey takes us around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in ancient Memphis around 1500 BCE, and the first thing you reach for isn't your phone, it's your makeup kit. The wealthy Egyptian woman beside you is already grinding galena, a lead sulfide mineral, into a fine powder that will become today's eye makeup. She mixes it with animal fat and soot, creating a thick, dark paste that she'll smear around her eyes in dramatic lines extending toward her temples. The irony hits you immediately. This culture that gave us some of history's most stunning art and architecture was slowly poisoning itself in the name of beauty. Every morning, thousands of Egyptians, from pharaohs to farmers, were applying lead-based cosmetics directly to their most sensitive skin. The lead would absorb through their eyelids, accumulating in their bloodstream and gradually attacking their nervous systems. But here's where it gets fascinating. They weren't completely ignorant about the dangers. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri actually mention lead poisoning symptoms, describing the tremors, the confusion, and the eventual madness that came with prolonged exposure. Yet they continued using galena-based coal for over 2,000 years. Why? Because looking good was literally a matter of life and death in their society. The mainstream historical fact that most people know is that Egyptians used coal for religious and practical purposes. It supposedly protected against the evil eye and reduced sun glare. What's less commonly discussed is the quirky reality that different social classes used different grades of lead. The wealthy could afford pure galena, while the poor mixed their lead with cheaper, even more toxic substances like antimony and copper compounds. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the connection between their cosmetics and the mysterious illnesses that plagued their upper classes. Some scholars point to medical texts that seem to describe lead poisoning symptoms, while others argue that the connection wasn't made because the poisoning was so gradual that it appeared to be natural aging. You watch as the woman applies the coal with a thin reed, creating those iconic almond-shaped eyes that we associate with Egyptian art. The lead gives the makeup an intense, almost supernatural darkness that modern cosmetics struggle to replicate. It's beautiful, mesmerizing even, and it's slowly killing her. The lead wasn't just in their eye makeup either. Egyptian women ground lead into face powders, mixed it into lip stains, and even used it as a base for their elaborate wigs. They were essentially coating themselves in poison from head to toe, all in pursuit of the pale, dramatic look that their culture deemed divine. What makes this even more disturbing is that lead-based cosmetics weren't unique to Egypt. As you'll discover throughout our journey tonight, virtually every ancient civilization found ways to incorporate deadly substances into their beauty routines. The Romans, the Greeks, the Chinese, they all had their own toxic traditions that make modern beauty standards look positively safe. The Egyptian obsession with light-based makeup lasted well into the Roman period, and even influenced early Christian communities in Egypt. Archaeological evidence shows that lead cosmetics were still being used in Egyptian monasteries, where monks and nuns apparently couldn't resist the allure of those dramatically darkened eyes, even as they preached about vanity being a sin. As you prepare to leave this ancient makeup session, you notice something chilling. The woman applying her kohl has a slight tremor in her hands. Her movements are just a bit too slow, her speech slightly slurred. These aren't signs of age. She's barely 30. These are the early symptoms of chronic lead poisoning, and she has no idea that her daily beauty routine is the cause. The lead-based kohl that made Egyptian eyes so captivating was essentially a slow-acting poison that accumulated in the body over years of use. Modern analysis of Egyptian mummies has revealed lead levels in their tissues that would be considered dangerously toxic by today's standards. Yet they continued this practice for millennia, passing down the recipes from mother to daughter like precious family secrets. Tonight, as we explore the deadly ingredients that ancient peoples smeared, painted, and rubbed into their skin, remember this Egyptian woman and her trembling hands. She represents millions of people throughout history who paid the ultimate price for beauty, their health, their sanity, and often their lives. The morning sun beats down mercilessly on the Nile, and you're about to witness one of history's most disgusting beauty secrets. That elegant Egyptian woman from earlier, she's now scooping what looks like chunky brown paste from a clay pot, and the smell hits you like a physical blow. This isn't some exotic spice or rare mineral. This is crocodile dung, and she's about to smear it all over her face. You watch in horrified fascination as she mixes the dried crocodile excrement with oils and ground minerals, creating what ancient Egyptians considered the ultimate sunscreen. The logic, if you can call it that, was surprisingly sound. Crocodiles spend their lives basking in the brutal Egyptian sun without getting burned, so their waste must contain some kind of protective properties. Of course, the reality was that they were just rubbing bacteria-laden animal feces into their pores. But hey, at least they were thinking scientifically. The mainstream historical fact here is that ancient Egyptians did indeed use various animal dungs in their cosmetic preparations, with crocodile excrement being particularly prized for sun protection. What's less well known is the quirky detail that different types of dung were assigned different beauty purposes. Elephant dung for wrinkle prevention, hippopotamus dung for hair growth, and gazelle droppings for skin softening. But crocodile dung held special significance because crocodiles were associated with Sobek, the Egyptian god of fertility and protection. Smearing crocodile waste on your face wasn't just about sun protection. It was a religious ritual that supposedly granted you the crocodile's legendary resilience. The irony, of course, is that this divine protection was actually exposing people to dangerous parasites and bacterial infections. You notice that the woman applies the dung mixture in careful patterns, almost like war paint. She's not just slapping it on randomly. There's an art to this revolting practice. The paste goes heaviest on her nose and cheekbones, the areas most likely to burn in the desert sun. She even dabs it under her eyes, creating a look that's part zombie, part ancient goddess. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians actually believed crocodile dung had magical properties, or if they understood it as a purely practical sun protection method. Some papyri suggest they recognized its physical benefits. The thick paste did create a barrier against UV rays, while others indicate they viewed it as a spiritual practice that connected them to the power of the Nile's most feared predator. The smell is absolutely overwhelming. Imagine the worst barnyard odor you've ever encountered, then multiply it by 10 and add the funk of rotting fish. That's what Egyptian women walked around smelling like when they wore their crocodile dung face masks. Yet this was considered the height of sophistication and beauty preparation. What makes this even more disturbing is that crocodile dung wasn't always easy to come by. The wealthy could afford fresh supplies from professional crocodile hunters, but the poor often had to make do with aged, dried dung that had been sitting in the sun for months. This older dung was actually more dangerous because it harbored more concentrated bacteria and parasites. The application process was elaborate and time-consuming. First, the dung had to be dried and ground into a fine powder. Then it was mixed with various oils. Castor oil was popular, and sometimes honey or milk. The resulting paste was applied in layers, allowed to dry, and then often covered with additional cosmetics. Women would wear this mixture for hours, sometimes entire days, before washing it off with more oils and scented waters. You watch as other women in the household begin their own dung-based beauty routines. One is mixing hippopotamus dung with crushed pearls for what she believes will give her skin a luminous glow. Another is preparing a hair treatment using gazelle droppings and fermented barley. The entire scene looks like some kind of scatological beauty salon from hell. The really twisted part is that this practice wasn't limited to Egypt. As trade routes expanded, the use of animal dung in cosmetics spread throughout the ancient world. Roman women imported Egyptian crocodile dung at enormous expense, considering it far superior to local alternatives. Greek women experimented with their own variations, using goat and sheep dung mixed with olive oil. But the Egyptians remained the masters of dung-based beauty treatments. They developed elaborate classifications for different types of animal waste, rating them based on the animal's diet, age, and habitat. Crocodile dung from the sacred pools near temples was considered the most potent, while dung from wild crocodiles was thought to be less effective but more spiritually pure. The woman finishes applying her crocodile dung sunscreen and admires herself in her bronze mirror. To her, she looks radiant and protected. To you, she looks like she's been rolling around in a sewer. But in a few hours, when the other women in the market are sporting painful sunburns, her skin will remain relatively unscathed. The crocodile dung, disgusting as it is, actually works as a physical sunblock. As the morning progresses, you realize that this revolting beauty practice represents something deeper about ancient cosmetics. The willingness to endure almost anything in pursuit of beauty and protection. These women knew exactly what they were putting on their faces, and they did it anyway because the alternative, sun damage, social rejection, or spiritual vulnerability, seemed worse than smelling like a reptile's bathroom. The Roman bathhouse gleams with marble and gold, but there's something sinister lurking beneath all that luxury. You're watching a wealthy Roman matron prepare for her evening social gathering, and she's reaching for a small silver vial that contains liquid death. The mercury inside catches the lamplight like molten silver, beautiful and mesmerizing, and absolutely lethal. She pours a few drops of the mercury onto her palm, where it forms perfect little spheres that roll around like liquid pearls. This isn't some accidental poisoning or medical mishap. This is deliberate. Roman women in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE deliberately painted their faces with mercury because it gave their skin an otherworldly, almost supernatural glow that no other cosmetic could achieve. You watch in horror as she begins massaging the mercury into her cheeks and forehead. The metal absorbs into her skin almost immediately, leaving behind a subtle, luminous sheen that makes her look like she's been kissed by moonlight. It's breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying because you know what mercury does to the human nervous system. The mainstream historical fact is that Romans used mercury in various cosmetic preparations, often mixed with other metals and oils to create face paints and skin treatments. What's less commonly discussed is the quirky reality that mercury-based cosmetics were so expensive that they became a status symbol. Only the wealthiest Roman women could afford to slowly poison themselves with liquid metal. But here's where it gets really twisted. They knew it was dangerous. Roman physicians like Galen wrote extensively about mercury poisoning, describing the tremors, the madness, and the eventual death that came with prolonged exposure. Yet wealthy Roman women continued using mercury cosmetics for centuries because the beauty benefits were considered worth the risk. The woman you're watching has been using mercury-based cosmetics for about 3 years, and the effects are already becoming visible. Her hands shake slightly as she applies the liquid metal, and there's a subtle tremor in her voice when she speaks. She's developed what Roman physicians called the silver sickness, chronic mercury poisoning that manifests as neurological symptoms that gradually worsen over time. Historians still argue whether Roman women fully understood the connection between their mercury cosmetics and their declining health, or if they rationalized the symptoms as unrelated ailments. Some evidence suggests that wealthy families hired food tasters not just to check for poison in their meals, but also to test new cosmetic preparations, indicating they were aware of the dangers but willing to take calculated risks. The mercury wasn't used alone. Roman cosmetic recipes called for mixing it with white lead, crushed pearls, and various oils to create different effects. Some preparations were designed to lighten the skin, others to create that ethereal glow, and still others to preserve a youthful appearance. The irony, of course, is that mercury actually accelerated aging by destroying the nervous system and causing muscle deterioration. You notice that the woman slave, who helps prepare these cosmetics daily, has developed a pronounced tremor and seems confused about simple tasks. She's suffering from secondary mercury poisoning just from handling the preparations. Yet neither woman makes the connection between the beautiful silver liquid and their deteriorating health. The application process was elaborate and ritualistic. Mercury was often heated to create vapors that were then condensed back into liquid form, supposedly purifying it and increasing its potency. Women would apply it with special silver brushes, believing that contact with other metals would contaminate the mercury and reduce its effectiveness. What makes this even more disturbing is that mercury-based cosmetics weren't just a Roman invention. They were imported luxury items. The mercury came primarily from Spanish mines, where slaves died by the thousands extracting the deadly metal. Roman women were literally painting their faces with the blood of enslaved miners, though they probably never made that connection. The really twisted part is that mercury cosmetics were often given as wedding gifts or birthday presents among the Roman elite. Wealthy mothers would pass down their mercury-based beauty recipes to their daughters like precious family heirlooms, unknowingly condemning the next generation to the same slow poisoning they were experiencing themselves. You watch as the woman admires her mercury-enhanced reflection in a polished silver mirror. Her skin has an almost supernatural luminosity that makes her look like a goddess descended from Mount Olympus. The effect is so stunning that you can almost understand why Roman women were willing to risk their lives for it. Almost. The mercury doesn't just affect her appearance, it's changing her personality. Mercury poisoning causes mood swings, paranoia, and eventually complete mental breakdown. Roman historians wrote about wealthy women who became increasingly erratic and violent as they aged, but they attributed this to feminine hysteria rather than cosmetic poisoning. As the evening progresses, you notice that several other women at the gathering are displaying similar symptoms: slight tremors, slurred speech, and an odd, glassy look in their eyes. They're all using mercury-based cosmetics, and they're all slowly dying from their beauty routines. Yet they continue to compliment each other on their radiant skin and ethereal glow. The woman you've been watching suddenly stumbles, her mercury-damaged nervous system failing her for just a moment. She laughs it off, blaming the wine, but you can see the fear in her eyes. Deep down, she knows something is wrong, but the social pressure to maintain her appearance is stronger than her survival instinct. By the end of the evening, as she carefully removes her mercury-enhanced makeup with oils and scented waters, you realize that this beautiful, intelligent woman is essentially committing slow suicide in the name of beauty. And tomorrow night, she'll do it all over again. The Victorian parlor is suffocating with heavy drapes and the scent of death, though the woman seated at her vanity doesn't realize that second part yet. You're watching her prepare for an evening soiree in 1860s London, and she's about to apply what she believes is the pinnacle of cosmetic sophistication: arsenic-laced face powder that promises to give her the pale, ethereal complexion that Victorian society worships. She opens an ornate silver compact containing what looks like innocent white powder, but you know better. This is Fowler's solution mixed with rice powder and chalk, a cosmetic preparation that contains enough arsenic to kill a horse. The irony is delicious and horrifying. In an era obsessed with moral purity and Christian virtue, respectable ladies are literally painting their faces with rat poison. The arsenic powder goes on like silk, creating an impossibly smooth, porcelain-white finish that makes her skin look like fine china. Victorian beauty standards demanded this deathly pale complexion because it signified that a woman was wealthy enough to avoid outdoor labor and refined enough to embody spiritual purity. What they didn't realize was that they were achieving this angelic look by slowly poisoning themselves with one of history's most notorious toxins. You watch as she carefully dusts the arsenic powder across her face, neck, and décolletage, using a soft brush made from rabbit fur. The mainstream historical fact is that arsenic-based cosmetics were incredibly popular throughout the Victorian era, marketed under innocent names like Pearl White and Venetian Ceruse. The quirky detail that most people don't know is that these products were often advertised in the same newspapers that ran stories about mysterious arsenic poisoning deaths, and nobody made the connection. The woman you're observing has been using arsenic cosmetics for about 2 years, and the effects are becoming increasingly obvious. Her hair has become thin and brittle, falling out in patches that she carefully conceals with elaborate hairstyles and hairpieces. Her fingernails are developing white lines and ridges, classic signs of chronic arsenic poisoning that Victorian doctors called mise lines, without understanding their cause. But the most disturbing symptom is what's happening to her personality. Arsenic poisoning causes paranoia, anxiety, and violent mood swings, which Victorian society attributed to female hysteria or nervous disorders. This woman, who was once known for her gentle disposition, has become increasingly suspicious of her servants, convinced that they're stealing from her or plotting against her. She doesn't realize that her own cosmetics are literally driving her insane. Historians still argue whether Victorian women were completely ignorant about the dangers of arsenic cosmetics, or if they chose to ignore the risks in pursuit of beauty. Some evidence suggests that women's magazines occasionally published warnings about toxic cosmetics, but these were usually buried among advertisements for the very same products they were warning against. The application ritual is elaborate and time-consuming. First, she applies a base layer of arsenic powder mixed with lard and rose water. Then she adds a second layer of pure arsenic powder for extra whiteness. Finally, she dusts herself with a finishing powder that contains arsenic, lead, and mercury. A toxic trifecta that would make a modern toxicologist faint with horror. What makes this even more twisted is that arsenic cosmetics were often marketed as health products. Advertisements claimed that arsenic would purify the blood, strengthen the constitution, and promote longevity. Victorian women genuinely believed they were improving their health while they were actually shortening their lives by decades. You notice that her lady's maid, who helps prepare these cosmetics daily, is showing similar symptoms of arsenic poisoning. The servant's hands are covered in a rash that she attributes to common eczema, but you recognize it as arsenical dermatitis. Both women are slowly dying from the same beauty routine, but their different social positions mean that only the lady receives medical attention, useless as it is, since Victorian doctors don't understand the connection between cosmetics and illness. The arsenic isn't just in her face powder, it's everywhere in her beauty routine. Her soap contains arsenic for skin purification. Her hair pomade includes arsenic for lustrous shine. Even her perfume has traces of arsenic, supposedly to preserve the delicate fragrance. She's essentially bathing in poison from head to toe. The really horrifying part is that arsenic cosmetics were often passed down through families like precious heirlooms. Mothers would give their daughters their secret beauty recipes, unknowingly condemning the next generation to the same slow poisoning they were experiencing. Victorian family portraits often show multiple generations of women with that characteristic arsenic pallor, and multiple generations dying young from mysterious wasting diseases. As she prepares to leave for her evening engagement, you notice that she's developed a slight limp, another symptom of chronic arsenic poisoning that affects the peripheral nervous system. She attributes it to a touch of rheumatism, never suspecting that her beautiful white complexion is literally rotting her body from the inside out. The woman admires herself in her full-length mirror, pleased with her ghostly pale appearance. To Victorian eyes, she looks like an angel, pure, refined, and spiritually elevated above the common masses. To your modern eyes, she looks like a walking corpse, her arsenic-enhanced pallor more reminiscent of a funeral parlor than a ballroom. At the soiree, she'll be surrounded by other women using the same toxic cosmetics, all of them slowly poisoning themselves in pursuit of an impossible beauty standard. They'll complement each other on their lovely complexions and refined appearances, never realizing that they're essentially attending a gathering of the walking dead. As the evening progresses, you realize that this Victorian obsession with arsenic-based beauty represents something deeper and more disturbing than simple vanity. It's a society so obsessed with artificial purity that it's willing to embrace actual death to achieve it. The ancient marketplace buzzes with activity, but your attention is fixed on a disturbing transaction taking place at a cosmetic stall. You're witnessing the birth of lipstick, and it's far more gruesome than any modern beauty tutorial would suggest. The vendor is crushing thousands of tiny cochineal insects into a deep red paste, their bodies bursting with carmine dye that will soon adorn the lips of wealthy women across the ancient world. But that's just the beginning of this bloody beauty story. Next to the insect-crushing station, another merchant is grinding cinnabar, mercury sulfide, into a brilliant red powder that glows like liquid fire. This toxic mineral will be mixed with the insect blood to create a lipstick so intensely red that it seems to pulse with its own heartbeat. The irony is perfect. Women are literally painting their lips with poison to make themselves more attractive to potential mates. You watch as a wealthy Roman woman examines the various red cosmetics on display. She's particularly drawn to the cinnabar-based preparations because of their supernatural intensity. The mainstream historical fact is that cinnabar was prized throughout the ancient world for its incredible color saturation. No other substance could produce such a vivid, lasting red. The quirky detail that most people miss is that cinnabar was also used to preserve corpses, so women were essentially applying embalming fluid to their lips. The vendor demonstrates his wares by painting stripes of different red preparations on a piece of leather. The cochineal-based lipstick produces a deep, blood-like red that's beautiful but relatively safe. The cinnabar mixture, however, creates an almost supernatural crimson that seems to glow from within, and it's absolutely lethal. Mercury poisoning from cinnabar-based lipsticks caused everything from gum disease and tooth loss to complete neurological breakdown. But the most disturbing part of this ancient lipstick market isn't the toxic ingredients, it's the human cost. You notice that several of the workers grinding cinnabar are showing obvious symptoms of mercury poisoning: trembling hands, slurred speech, and the telltale Mad Hatter personality changes that come with chronic mercury exposure. They're literally dying to create beauty products for wealthy customers who have no idea about the human suffering behind their cosmetics. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples understood the connection between cinnabar-based cosmetics and the mysterious illnesses that plagued their upper classes. Some Roman medical texts describe symptoms that clearly indicate mercury poisoning, but they attribute these ailments to bad air or divine punishment rather than cosmetic ingredients. The lipstick preparation process is elaborate and ritualistic. First, the cochineal insects are dried and ground into a fine powder. Then they're mixed with various binding agents, animal fat, beeswax, or plant oils, to create a paste that will adhere to the lips. For the premium products, cinnabar is added to intensify the color and create that otherworldly glow that wealthy customers crave. What makes this even more twisted is that different cultures had their own variations of toxic lipstick. Egyptian women mixed their cochineal with lead-based compounds for extra opacity. Greek women added antimony for a metallic sheen. Chinese courtesans used a combination of cinnabar and crushed pearls that was so toxic it could kill with a single kiss. Literally. You watch as the Roman woman selects the most expensive cinnabar-based lipstick, despite the vendor's half-hearted warning about using it sparingly. She's not just buying a cosmetic. She's purchasing a slow-acting poison that will gradually destroy her nervous system while making her lips irresistibly beautiful. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. She's willing to risk her life for the perfect shade of red. The application ritual is almost ceremonial. Using a small brush made from animal hair, she carefully paints the toxic mixture onto her lips, building up layers to achieve maximum color intensity. The cinnabar gives her lips an almost supernatural luminosity that makes them appear to glow in the dim marketplace light. It's breathtakingly beautiful and absolutely terrifying. But the lipstick isn't just about beauty, it's about power and status. In ancient Rome, only wealthy women could afford cinnabar-based cosmetics, so wearing them was a clear signal of social position. The more intensely red your lips, the higher your status in society. Women were literally risking their lives to display their wealth and social standing. The really horrifying part is that cinnabar-based lipsticks were often given as romantic gifts. Roman men would present these toxic cosmetics to their lovers, unknowingly condemning them to slow mercury poisoning. Love letters from the period often mention the divine red lips of beloved women, never realizing that this divine beauty was actually a symptom of heavy metal toxicity. As the day progresses, you notice that several women in the marketplace are wearing the same cinnabar-based lipstick, their lips glowing with that supernatural red intensity. They look like a coven of beautiful vampires, their toxic cosmetics giving them an otherworldly appearance that's both alluring and deeply unsettling. The woman you've been watching completes her purchase and carefully applies her new lipstick using a polished bronze mirror. The transformation is immediate and dramatic. Her lips now glow with an intensity that seems almost magical. She's achieved the perfect ancient beauty look, and she's probably shortened her life by several years in the process. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier. Compared to cinnabar lipstick, reptile excrement fade. The funeral pyre crackles in the distance, but you're not here to mourn the dead. You're here to witness one of history's most macabre beauty secrets. You're standing in ancient Rome, watching a wealthy woman collect the ashes from yesterday's cremation, and she's not planning to honor the deceased. She's planning to wear them. You watch in horrified fascination as she carefully sifts through the cremation ashes, selecting only the finest particles for her cosmetic collection. This isn't grave robbing, this is beauty preparation. Roman women discovered that human ashes, when mixed with soot and animal fat, created the most dramatically dark eye makeup imaginable. The carbon content in cremated human remains produced a black so intense it seemed to absorb light itself. But human ashes weren't the only death-related ingredient in ancient eye makeup. You notice another woman grinding charcoal from burnt almond shells, creating a slightly less morbid but equally dramatic black powder. The mainstream historical fact is that ancient peoples used various forms of carbon-based materials for eye makeup, from simple charcoal to more exotic burned substances. The quirky detail that most beauty historians skip over is that different cultures had elaborate hierarchies for their carbon sources, with human ashes ranking highest for their supposed spiritual properties. The ash-collecting woman explains her technique to a younger apprentice, treating this ghoulish beauty ritual like a normal cosmetic lesson. She demonstrates how to distinguish between different types of cremation ash. Bones produce a whiter, more refined powder, while soft tissues create a darker, more intense black. The most prized ashes came from young, healthy individuals who died suddenly. Their remains supposedly retained more life force that would transfer to the wearer. Historians still argue whether the use of human ashes in cosmetics was purely practical, or if it carried deeper spiritual significance. Some evidence suggests that Roman women believed wearing the ashes of the dead would grant them protection from evil spirits, while others argue it was simply the most effective way to achieve the dramatic eye makeup that their culture demanded. The preparation process is disturbingly methodical. The ashes are first ground into an extremely fine powder using marble mortars and pestles. Then they're mixed with various binding agents. Bear grease was particularly popular, to create a paste that would adhere to the delicate skin around the eyes. The final product has an almost supernatural darkness that makes the wearer's eyes appear to glow from within shadowy depths. You watch as she begins applying the ash-based eye makeup, using a thin bronze applicator to create dramatic lines extending from her inner corners to her temples. The effect is immediately striking. Her eyes become the focal point of her entire face, appearing larger, more mysterious, and somehow otherworldly. It's beautiful in a deeply unsettling way, like staring into the eyes of a beautiful ghost. But the human ashes weren't just used for dramatic effect. They were believed to have practical benefits too. Roman medical texts claimed that cremation ash could prevent eye infections and improve vision. Of course, the reality was quite different. The alkaline nature of human ashes often caused severe irritation and chemical burns around the eyes, leading to permanent scarring and vision problems. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that it wasn't limited to Rome. Egyptian women mixed human ashes with their coal preparations, believing it would grant them the wisdom of the deceased. Greek women used ashes from cremated heroes and philosophers, hoping to absorb their knowledge through their eye makeup. Chinese courtesans incorporated ashes from cremated poets and artists, seeking to enhance their own creativity and allure. The woman you're watching has been using ash-based eye makeup for several years, and the effects are becoming visible. The skin around her eyes has developed a grayish tinge that she attributes to natural aging, but you recognize it as chemical damage from prolonged exposure to alkaline ash. Her tear ducts are constantly irritated, causing her eyes to water frequently, which she actually considers a benefit because it makes her appear more emotionally sensitive. The really twisted part is that different social classes had access to different qualities of human ash. Wealthy women could afford ashes from the cremations of young, beautiful individuals, while the poor had to make do with ashes from paupers' graves or mass cremations. There was literally a black market for premium human remains, with grave robbers and crematorium workers selling high-quality ashes to cosmetic suppliers. You notice that her slave, who helps prepare these ash-based cosmetics, has developed chronic respiratory problems from constantly inhaling the fine particles of human remains. The woman doesn't make the connection between her beauty routine and her servant's declining health. She's too focused on achieving that perfect, otherworldly eye makeup that Roman society demands. The application ritual has an almost religious quality to it. She whispers prayers to the deceased as she applies their ashes, asking for their protection and blessing. In her mind, she's not just applying makeup, she's connecting with the spiritual realm and channeling the power of the dead. The fact that she's literally rubbing corpses into her eyes doesn't seem to bother her at all. As the morning progresses, you watch other women in the household begin their own ash-based beauty routines. One is mixing cremation ashes with soot from oil lamps to create a slightly different shade of black. Another is preparing a special batch using ashes from a recently deceased gladiator, believing it will give her eyes a more fierce and commanding appearance. The woman admires her finished look in a polished silver mirror, pleased with the dramatic intensity of her ash-enhanced eyes. To Roman standards, she looks mysterious, powerful, and spiritually connected. To your modern sensibilities, she looks like she's been rolling around in a crematorium. But there's no denying the effectiveness of her makeup. Those ash-darkened eyes are absolutely mesmerizing, even if they're made from the remains of dead people. Remember that mercury-based face paint we saw earlier? At least liquid metal poisoning was accidental. This ash-based eye makeup represents something even more disturbing: the deliberate incorporation of human death into daily beauty routines, turning crematoriums into cosmetic supply chains. The medieval monastery reeks of ammonia, so strong it makes your eyes water. But the nuns gathered around the large wooden vat seem completely unbothered by the stench. You're witnessing one of history's most revolting beauty secrets. the systematic collection and fermentation of human urine for cosmetic purposes. What you're seeing isn't some primitive ignorance. This is sophisticated medieval chemistry that happens to involve gallons of aged piss. Sister Margaret, the abbey's unofficial beauty expert, is stirring a vat of urine that's been fermenting for 3 months. The liquid has turned a disturbing amber color and developed a foam on top that looks like rotten beer. She explains to the younger nuns that this aged water is the secret to achieving the pale, luminous complexion that medieval society considers the pinnacle of feminine beauty. You watch in disgusted fascination as she demonstrates the application process. Using a cloth soaked in the fermented urine, she dabs it across her face and neck, explaining that the ammonia will bleach away any unsightly color and leave behind skin as white as fresh snow. The mainstream historical fact is that urine-based cosmetics were used throughout medieval Europe for skin lightening and hair bleaching. The quirky detail that most historians gloss over is that different monasteries developed elaborate aging processes for their urine, treating it like fine wine. But it gets worse. The nuns aren't just using any urine. They have a complex hierarchy for their liquid cosmetics. Virgin urine is considered the most pure and effective, followed by urine from pregnant women, then children, and finally adults. The most prized urine comes from young boys who have been fed specific diets designed to enhance the cosmetic properties of their waste. The fermentation process is disturbingly scientific. The urine is collected in large ceramic vessels and left to age for months, with the nuns regularly stirring and testing it for the proper consistency and smell. They add various herbs and minerals to enhance its bleaching properties, creating what amounts to a medieval chemical laboratory dedicated to processing human waste into beauty products. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the scientific principles behind urine-based cosmetics, or if they simply stumbled upon effective techniques through trial and error. Some evidence suggests they recognized that the ammonia in aged urine had bleaching properties, while other sources indicate they believed the cosmetic effects were purely spiritual or magical. You notice that Sister Margaret's skin has indeed achieved an unnaturally pale complexion, but it's also developed a strange, almost translucent quality that makes her look more like a corpse than a living person. The constant exposure to ammonia has essentially chemically burned away the top layers of her skin, creating the pale effect she desires, while simultaneously destroying her skin's natural protective barriers. The urine isn't just used for facial treatments, it's a complete beauty system. The nuns use it to bleach their hair, whiten their teeth, and even as a deodorant. The irony is perfect. They're using one of the most foul-smelling substances imaginable to try to improve their personal hygiene and appearance. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that it wasn't limited to monasteries. Wealthy medieval women hired servants specifically to collect and age urine for their beauty routines. There were professional urine collectors who would go door to door gathering the raw materials for cosmetic preparations, creating an entire economy based on human waste. The application ritual is elaborate and time-consuming. First, the face is washed with regular water to remove dirt and oils. Then the aged urine is applied in layers, allowed to dry, and reapplied multiple times. The process can take hours, during which the woman must endure the overwhelming stench of fermented ammonia, while her skin literally burns from the chemical exposure. You watch as a younger nun experiences her first urine facial treatment. Her eyes are streaming from the ammonia fumes, and her skin is turning bright red from the chemical burns. But Sister Margaret assures her that this is normal, and that the results will be worth the temporary discomfort. The girl's obvious distress is dismissed as vanity and weakness, rather than a reasonable response to having her face doused in aged piss. The really twisted part is that urine-based cosmetics were often blessed by priests and considered spiritually purifying as well as physically beautifying. Medieval religious texts actually endorsed the use of urine for cosmetic purposes, arguing that it represented a form of spiritual cleansing that would make women more pleasing to God and their husbands. Different regions developed their own variations of urine-based beauty treatments. French women preferred urine aged with rose petals and honey. German women added crushed pearls and silver dust to their fermented urine. Italian women mixed their aged urine with wine and olive oil, creating what they called divine water for its supposed miraculous beautifying properties. The woman you're watching has been using urine-based cosmetics for over a decade, and the long-term effects are becoming increasingly obvious. Her skin has become so thin and damaged that you can see the blood vessels underneath, giving her a disturbing, almost transparent appearance. Her hair, repeatedly bleached with ammonia-rich urine, has become brittle and is falling out in patches. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this medieval beauty practice is the psychological conditioning involved. These women have been taught from childhood that natural skin color is ugly and shameful, and that only through painful chemical treatments can they achieve acceptable beauty. They're literally torturing themselves with fermented waste because their society has convinced them that their natural appearance is inadequate. As the morning progresses, you realize that this urine-based beauty routine represents something deeper than simple vanity. It's a systematic destruction of women's natural appearance in service of impossible beauty standards. These nuns are essentially poisoning themselves with their own waste, all in pursuit of a pale, ethereal look that their culture associates with purity and spiritual elevation. Remember that arsenic face powder from the Victorian era. At least those women were using a recognizable poison. These medieval women are literally bathing in fermented piss and calling it a beauty treatment. The Renaissance garden looks peaceful in the morning light, but there's something sinister growing among the roses and herbs. You're watching an Italian noblewoman carefully harvest belladonna berries, their dark purple skin glistening with deadly beauty. She's not planning to poison anyone, at least not intentionally. She's preparing to drop the juice of these lethal nightshade berries directly into her eyes to achieve the wide-eyed, luminous look that Renaissance beauty standards demand. The name belladonna literally means beautiful woman in Italian, and you're about to discover why. The plant contains atropine, a powerful alkaloid that dilates the pupils to an almost supernatural degree. When dropped into the eyes, belladonna juice creates an intense, otherworldly gaze that makes women appear more alluring and mysterious. It also causes temporary blindness, severe pain, and can lead to permanent eye damage or death. You watch in horrified fascination as she carefully extracts the juice from the ripe berries, using a silver needle to pierce each one, and collect the dark liquid in a tiny crystal vial. The mainstream historical fact is that belladonna was widely used throughout Renaissance Europe as a cosmetic eye treatment. The quirky detail that most people don't realize is that wealthy women often employed professional eye servants, whose only job was to administer these dangerous eye drops and guide their temporarily blinded mistresses around their homes. But belladonna is just one plant in her deadly beauty garden. You notice rows of foxglove, whose digitalis-containing leaves were ground into face powders despite their ability to stop the heart. There's hemlock, used to create pale lip stains that could kill with a kiss. And over there, she's growing henbane, whose seeds were burned to create a smoke that women would inhale to achieve a dreamy, ethereal expression, along with hallucinations and respiratory failure. The preparation process is disturbingly ritualistic. She begins by blessing each plant, asking for its cooperation in her beauty routine. Then she carefully harvests only the most potent parts, the ripest berries, the youngest leaves, the most toxic seeds. Everything is processed using silver tools, which she believes prevents contamination and preserves the plant's deadly effectiveness. Historians still argue whether Renaissance women fully understood the lethal nature of their botanical cosmetics, or if they rationalized the obvious dangers as necessary sacrifices for beauty. Contemporary medical texts clearly describe the symptoms of plant poisoning. Yet these same texts often include recipes for cosmetic preparations using the exact same toxic plants. You watch as she prepares to administer the belladonna drops, tilting her head back and carefully placing 2 drops of the dark juice into each eye. The effect is immediate and dramatic. Her pupils dilate to enormous black circles that make her eyes appear almost alien. She's achieved the Renaissance ideal of beauty, and she's probably damaged her vision permanently in the process. The pain is obviously excruciating. Tears stream down her face as the belladonna burns her corneas, but she endures it with the stoic determination of someone who believes suffering is the price of beauty. She'll be functionally blind for the next several hours, unable to read, write, or navigate without assistance. But her eyes will have that otherworldly, captivating glow that Renaissance men find irresistible. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that it wasn't just about beauty, it was about power. Women with dilated pupils were considered more sexually appealing and emotionally available. The belladonna didn't just change their appearance, it altered their perceived personality and social status. They were literally drugging themselves to appear more desirable to men. The botanical beauty garden contains other horrors too. She shows you her collection of deadly nightshade varieties, each bred for different cosmetic effects. Some produce a more intense pupil dilation, others create a longer-lasting effect, and still others are mixed with other toxins to achieve specific beauty goals. It's like a poison laboratory disguised as a flower garden. You notice that her lady's maid, who helps prepare these botanical cosmetics, has developed chronic respiratory problems from constantly inhaling toxic plant vapors. The servant's hands are stained with plant juices that have caused permanent skin discoloration and nerve damage. Both women are slowly being poisoned by their daily beauty routine, but only the noblewoman receives medical attention when symptoms appear. The really twisted part is that different plants were assigned different beauty purposes based on their toxic effects. Foxglove was used for lip color because its digitalis content caused a flushed, fevered appearance. Hemlock was prized for face powder because its neurotoxins created a pale, ethereal complexion. Henbane was burned as incense because its psychoactive compounds made women appear dreamy and mysterious. The application of these botanical cosmetics follows an elaborate schedule designed to maximize their toxic effects while minimizing immediate death. Belladonna is applied in the morning for all-day pupil dilation. Foxglove lip stain is refreshed throughout the day to maintain that fevered flush. Hemlock face powder is applied in thin layers to avoid immediate poisoning while achieving maximum pallor. As the morning progresses, you watch other women in the household begin their own botanical beauty routines. One is brewing a tea from digitalis leaves that she'll drink to achieve a natural flush from the inside out. Another is preparing a face mask from ground henbane seeds that will give her skin a luminous glow, along with mild hallucinations. The woman you've been watching completes her belladonna treatment and attempts to admire herself in a mirror, but her dilated pupils make it impossible to focus properly. She has to rely on her maid's assurance that she looks beautiful, trusting that her temporary blindness and excruciating pain have achieved the desired aesthetic effect. The irony is perfect. In pursuit of beauty that will make them more attractive to others, these women are literally blinding themselves and destroying their ability to see the world around them. They're trading their vision for the illusion of enhanced beauty, and they're doing it voluntarily. Remember that fermented urine facial treatment. The ancient Chinese laboratory gleams with bronze instruments and ceramic vessels, but the metallic tang in the air tells you that something dangerous is brewing here. You're watching an imperial court alchemist prepare cosmetics for the empress, and he's grinding enough toxic metals to poison a small army. The mortar and pestle spark as he crushes chunks of pure copper into a fine green powder that will become today's eyeshadow. But copper is just the beginning of this metallic madness. On the workbench beside him, you see ingots of tin being filed into silvery dust for face powder, chunks of antimony being ground for coal, and most disturbing of all, raw lead being processed into the white face paint that Chinese nobility considers the height of sophistication. The irony is staggering. The most powerful people in the empire are literally painting themselves with industrial toxins. You watch as he carefully measures out precise amounts of each metal, treating this cosmetic preparation like a complex chemical formula. The mainstream historical fact is that ancient Chinese cosmetics contained dangerous levels of heavy metals, often in concentrations that would be considered lethal by modern standards. The quirky detail that most historians overlook is that different metals were assigned specific spiritual properties: copper for wisdom, tin for purity, lead for longevity, creating a mystical justification for systematic poisoning. The preparation process is disturbingly scientific. Each metal must be ground to a specific fineness, heated to exact temperatures, and mixed in precise ratios to achieve the desired cosmetic effects. The alchemist has spent years perfecting these formulas, creating what amounts to a sophisticated system for delivering heavy metal poisoning through beauty products. But the metals aren't used alone. They're combined with other toxic substances to enhance their effects. The copper eyeshadow is mixed with crushed malachite and verdigris, creating a green so intense it seems to glow with its own light. The tin face powder is combined with white lead and ground pearls, producing a silvery luminescence that makes the wearer appear almost supernatural. Historians still argue whether ancient Chinese alchemists understood the toxic nature of their metallic cosmetics, or if they genuinely believed these substances had beneficial properties. Some texts suggest they recognized the dangers, but considered them acceptable risks for achieving imperial beauty standards, while others indicate they viewed metal poisoning symptoms as signs of spiritual purification. You notice that the alchemist himself shows obvious signs of chronic metal poisoning. His hands shake with a fine tremor characteristic of mercury exposure. His skin has the grayish pallor of lead poisoning, and his speech is slightly slurred from neurological damage. He's literally dying from his own cosmetic creations, but he continues his work with the dedication of a true artist. The metallic cosmetics aren't just about beauty, they're about displaying wealth and power. Only the imperial court can afford pure metals for cosmetic use, so wearing them is a clear signal of supreme social status. The more toxic the metal, the more expensive and prestigious the cosmetic. Women are literally risking their lives to display their position in the social hierarchy. The application process requires special tools made from precious metals to avoid contamination. Gold brushes for applying copper eyeshadow, silver applicators for tin face powder, and platinum needles for creating intricate metallic designs on the skin. The entire beauty routine becomes an elaborate display of wealth and technological sophistication. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that different metals were believed to have different aging effects. Copper was thought to preserve youthful skin, tin was supposed to prevent wrinkles, and lead was believed to grant immortality. The reality, of course, was exactly the opposite. These metals were accelerating aging and causing premature death. You watch as a court lady arrives for her metallic makeup session. The alchemist begins by applying a base layer of lead-based white paint that covers her entire face and neck. Then he adds copper eyeshadow that creates an otherworldly green shimmer around her eyes. Finally, he dusts her with tin powder that gives her skin a silvery, almost robotic appearance. The transformation is immediate and striking. She no longer looks entirely human. The metallic cosmetics have given her an alien, supernatural appearance that's both beautiful and deeply unsettling. She's achieved the Chinese imperial ideal of otherworldly beauty, and she's probably shortened her life by several years in the process. The really twisted part is that these metallic cosmetics were often given as diplomatic gifts between kingdoms. Chinese emperors would present foreign dignitaries with elaborate cosmetic sets containing the finest toxic metals, essentially offering them the opportunity to poison themselves with luxury beauty products. It was considered a great honor to receive such gifts. Different metals were processed using different techniques to maximize their cosmetic and toxic effects. Copper was heated with sulfur to create more intense green compounds. Tin was alloyed with lead to increase its opacity and toxicity. Antimony was ground with mercury to produce a black coal, so intense it seemed to absorb light itself. The woman you're watching has been using metallic cosmetics for several years, and the effects are becoming increasingly obvious. Her hair has developed a metallic sheen that she considers beautiful, but is actually a sign of heavy metal accumulation in her follicles. Her fingernails have developed strange ridges and discoloration that court physicians attribute to divine transformation, rather than metal poisoning. As the session progresses, you realize that this ancient Chinese practice of metallic cosmetics represents something even more disturbing than simple vanity. It's the systematic transformation of human beings into living metal sculptures. With all the medieval kitchen reeks of rancid fat and decay, but the woman stirring the large cauldron seems completely unbothered by the stench. You're witnessing the preparation of what medieval society considers the ultimate luxury moisturizer, a horrifying concoction of bear grease, whale blubber, and decomposing animal fat that wealthy women will soon be smearing all over their bodies. She ladles a chunk of bear fat from the pot, its surface crawling with maggots that she casually brushes away before adding it to her cosmetic mixture. This isn't some primitive ignorance. This is sophisticated medieval chemistry that happens to involve the systematic collection and processing of rotting animal carcasses for beauty purposes. The mainstream historical fact is that animal fats were the primary base for medieval cosmetics and moisturizers. The quirky detail that most beauty historians prefer to skip is that the most prized fats came from animals that had been dead for weeks, as decomposition supposedly enhanced their cosmetic properties. But bear grease is just the beginning of this nauseating beauty routine. You watch as she adds whale blubber that's been aging in barrels for months, its surface covered with a thick layer of green mold that she stirs directly into the mixture. Then comes pig fat from animals that died of disease, sheep tallow from rotting carcasses, and finally, the most prized ingredient of all, fat rendered from human corpses. The preparation process is disturbingly methodical. Different animal fats are assigned different beauty purposes based on the characteristics of their original owners. Bear fat is used for strength and endurance, whale blubber for smoothness and water resistance, pig fat for softness and pliability. Human fat, when available, is considered the most effective because it's supposedly most compatible with human skin. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the health risks of using decomposing animal fat as cosmetics, or if they genuinely believed that putrefaction enhanced the beneficial properties of these substances. Some medical texts from the period describe infections and skin diseases that clearly result from contaminated cosmetics. Yet these same texts often include recipes for beauty preparations, using the exact same rotting ingredients. You notice that the woman preparing these fat-based cosmetics has developed chronic skin infections that she attributes to humoral imbalances, rather than the obvious cause of rubbing decomposing animal carcasses into her pores. Her hands are covered with open sores and rashes, but she continues her work with the dedication of someone who believes she's creating products that will enhance beauty and health. The fat isn't just used as a base. It's the primary ingredient in elaborate beauty treatments that cover the entire body. Medieval women would coat themselves from head to toe in these rancid animal fats, believing that different fats would transfer the positive qualities of their original owners. They were essentially turning themselves into walking repositories of decomposing animal matter. What makes this practice even more revolting is that the fats were often mixed with other organic materials to enhance their supposed benefits. Crushed insects for color, fermented urine for bleaching, human blood for vitality, and various decomposing plant matter for fragrance. The resulting mixture was so foul-smelling and contaminated that it's amazing anyone survived using it. The application process was elaborate and time-consuming. First, the skin was scrubbed with rough cloths to remove any existing oils and open the pores. Then the animal fat mixture was applied in thick layers, massaged into the skin, and left to absorb for hours. The smell was so overwhelming that wealthy women often hired servants specifically to apply these treatments in separate buildings, to avoid contaminating their living spaces. You watch as a wealthy merchant's wife arrives for her fat-based beauty treatment. The woman begins by coating her customer's face with bear grease that's been mixed with decomposing rose petals and maggot-infested honey. The smell is so intense that you have to step back, but the customer endures it with the stoic determination of someone who believes suffering is the price of beauty. The really twisted part is that different social classes had access to different qualities of animal fat. Wealthy women could afford fresh bear grease and whale blubber, while the poor had to make do with fat from diseased livestock and roadkill. There was literally a hierarchy of decomposition, with the most putrid fats being reserved for the lowest social classes. The fat-based cosmetics weren't just about moisturizing. They were believed to have magical properties that could transfer the characteristics of their animal sources to the user. Women who used bear fat expected to become stronger and more resilient. Those who used whale blubber hoped to develop smooth, water-resistant skin. The psychological conditioning was so strong that they convinced themselves these disgusting treatments were actually working. Different regions developed their own variations of fat-based beauty treatments. French women preferred fat from wild boars mixed with wine and herbs. German women used fat from wolves and bears, believing it would make them more fierce and attractive. English women favored sheep tallow mixed with ale and crushed flowers, creating what they called maiden's butter for its supposed virginity-preserving properties. The woman you're watching has been using fat-based cosmetics for over a decade, and the long-term effects are becoming increasingly obvious. Her skin has developed a permanent grayish tinge from constant exposure to decomposing animal matter. She suffers from chronic infections and rashes that never fully heal, but she attributes these to natural aging, rather than the obvious cause of coating herself in rotting fat. As the treatment progresses, you realize that this medieval practice of fat-based cosmetics represents something even more disturbing than simple vanity. It's the systematic contamination of the human body with decomposing animal matter, all in pursuit of beauty standards that equate putrefaction with purification. Remember those metallic Chinese cosmetics we saw earlier? At least heavy metals were clean poisons. These medieval women are essentially marinating themselves in decomposing animal carcasses and calling it a beauty treatment. The ancient temple glows with torchlight, but there's something deeply unsettling about the ceremony you're witnessing. You're standing in a Mayan sacred chamber, watching priests prepare cosmetics for the upcoming ritual, and they're grinding human bones into powder that will soon adorn the faces of noble women. This isn't just makeup. This is a spiritual transformation that requires the literal incorporation of death into beauty. The head priest carefully selects femur bones from recently sacrificed warriors, explaining that the strength and courage of the dead will transfer to whoever wears their powdered remains. You watch in horrified fascination as he uses obsidian blades to scrape the bones clean, then grinds them in a jade mortar until they become a fine white powder that sparkles in the firelight like crushed diamonds. But human bone dust is just one ingredient in this macabre cosmetic collection. On the altar beside him, you see bowls of fresh human blood being mixed with clay to create red face paint, chunks of human fat being rendered down for lip balm, and most disturbing of all, human teeth being crushed into powder for tooth whitening. The mainstream historical fact is that many ancient cultures incorporated human remains into their ceremonial cosmetics. The quirky detail that most anthropologists prefer not to discuss is that different body parts were assigned specific beauty purposes based on their spiritual significance. The bone powder preparation is disturbingly ritualistic. Each bone must be blessed by the priests, cleansed with sacred water, and ground according to specific lunar cycles to maximize its spiritual potency. The resulting powder isn't just a cosmetic. It's a direct connection to the spirit world that transforms the wearer into a living bridge between life and death. You notice that the women who regularly use these bone-based cosmetics have developed an otherworldly appearance that goes beyond simple makeup effects. Their skin has taken on a translucent quality that makes them appear almost ghostly, and their eyes have developed an intense, almost hypnotic gaze that seems to look through rather than at the people around them. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples viewed human-based cosmetics as purely spiritual practices, or if they recognized practical benefits from using human remains in their beauty routines. Some evidence suggests they believed human bone powder had superior adhesive properties compared to animal alternatives, while others indicate the practice was entirely religious in nature. The blood-based face paint requires equally elaborate preparation. Fresh human blood is collected in sacred vessels and mixed with specific clays that have been blessed by shamans. The mixture must be stirred with human finger bones, while priests chant incantations designed to preserve the life force of the blood donor. The resulting paint has an intensity and luminosity that no plant or mineral-based cosmetic can match. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that the human remains used in cosmetics often came from specific types of people chosen for their supposed spiritual properties. Virgin blood for purity, warrior bones for strength, child teeth for innocence, and elder fat for wisdom. The cosmetics weren't just made from human remains. They were made from carefully selected human remains chosen for their metaphysical qualities. The application process is treated as a sacred ritual rather than a simple beauty routine. The bone powder is applied while priests chant prayers to the deceased, asking for their blessing and protection. The blood paint is dabbed onto specific facial points that correspond to spiritual energy centers. Every aspect of the makeup application is designed to facilitate communication with the spirit world. You watch as a high-ranking noble woman prepares for the ceremony by having human bone powder applied to her face in intricate patterns that tell the story of her lineage and spiritual achievements. The white powder creates geometric designs that make her appear more like a living sculpture than a human being. She's being transformed into a walking representation of her culture's relationship with death and the afterlife. The human fat lip balm is perhaps the most disturbing element of this cosmetic ritual. Fat rendered from sacrificed humans is mixed with aromatic resins and applied to the lips in thick layers that create an unnaturally glossy appearance. The priests explain that this will allow the wearer to speak with the voices of the dead, channeling their wisdom and knowledge through her enhanced lips. Different cultures develop their own variations of human-based cosmetics, each with specific spiritual justifications. Aztec women used ground human hearts mixed with obsidian dust for eye makeup that supposedly granted them the ability to see into the future. Celtic druids created face paints from human brain matter that were believed to enhance intelligence and magical abilities. Egyptian priests mixed human liver with gold dust to create cosmetics that granted divine wisdom. The woman you're watching has been using human-based cosmetics for several years as part of her religious duties, and the psychological effects are becoming increasingly obvious. She speaks in whispers, claiming she can hear the voices of the dead whose remains she wears. Her behavior has become increasingly erratic and otherworldly, but the priests interpret this as evidence that the cosmetics are working properly. The really twisted part is that these human-based cosmetics were often made from people the wearer knew personally. A woman might wear face powder made from her deceased grandmother's bones, or lip balm rendered from her sacrificed brother's fat. The cosmetics weren't just spiritual tools. They were intimate connections to specific deceased individuals. The preparation of human teeth powder requires special techniques to preserve their spiritual essence. The teeth are first blessed in elaborate ceremonies, then ground using tools made from the same person's bones. The resulting powder is so fine it appears almost luminescent, and when applied to the teeth, it creates an unnaturally white smile that seems to glow in the darkness. As the ceremony begins, you realize that these human-based cosmetics represent something far more disturbing than simple beauty enhancement. They're a systematic incorporation of death into daily life, transforming living people into walking memorials to the deceased. The women wearing these cosmetics aren't just beautiful, they're literally embodying the spirits of the dead. Remember that animal fat moisturizers from medieval times. At least those women were only coating themselves in decomposing the medieval alchemists' laboratory bubbles with mysterious concoctions. But the most disturbing experiments are happening at the beauty station in the corner. You're watching a learned scholar attempt to create the perfect cosmetic through what he calls controlled putrefaction, the systematic rotting of organic materials to enhance their beauty properties. The stench is so overwhelming that even the rats have abandoned this corner of the laboratory. He's stirring a cauldron filled with fruit that's been decomposing for 3 months, its surface covered with a thick layer of multicolored mold that he carefully scrapes off and collects in separate vials. This isn't accidental spoilage. This is deliberate fermentation designed to create what medieval alchemists believed were the most potent beauty treatments imaginable. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval people used fermented organic materials in their cosmetics, believing that decomposition enhanced their beneficial properties. The quirky detail that most historians avoid mentioning is that different stages of rot were assigned specific beauty purposes, creating elaborate timelines for optimal putrefaction. But rotting fruit is just the beginning of this nauseating beauty laboratory. In another corner, you see milk that's been curdling for weeks, its surface alive with writhing maggots that the alchemist explains are essential for creating the perfect skin-softening treatment. Next to that, there's a barrel of fermenting wine mixed with human urine that's been aging for 6 months, developing what he calls the essence of transformation. The fermentation process is disturbingly scientific. Each organic material must rot for a specific duration under carefully controlled conditions to achieve maximum cosmetic potency. Apples are fermented for exactly 90 days, milk for 42 days, and wine-urine mixtures for a full year. The alchemist maintains detailed charts tracking the decomposition progress of dozens of different materials. You watch as he demonstrates the preparation of his most prized creation, fermented breast milk mixed with spoiled honey and decomposing rose petals. The mixture has been rotting for 8 months and has developed a consistency like thick soup, with chunks of unidentifiable organic matter floating in a brown liquid that smells like death itself. He explains that this concoction will grant eternal youth to whoever applies it regularly. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists genuinely believed that putrefaction enhanced the beneficial properties of organic materials, or if they were simply following ancient traditions without understanding the underlying principles. Some texts suggest they viewed decomposition as a form of spiritual purification that released the essential life force of organic materials. The spoiled milk treatment is particularly revolting. The alchemist carefully strains out the largest maggots, though he leaves the smaller ones because they supposedly enhance the treatment's effectiveness, and applies the resulting liquid to a wooden mannequin head to demonstrate proper technique. The milk has separated into chunky curds floating in a yellowish liquid that looks exactly like vomit. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that different types of spoilage were believed to have different beauty benefits. Milk spoiled with human saliva was thought to prevent wrinkles. Fruit rotted in graves was supposed to restore youth, and wine fermented with menstrual blood was believed to grant eternal beauty. The more disgusting the fermentation process, the more powerful the supposed cosmetic effects. The application process requires special tools designed to handle decomposing organic matter. Silver spoons for stirring fermented mixtures, gold brushes for applying spoiled milk treatments, and platinum needles for extracting the most potent elements from rotting fruit. The entire beauty routine becomes an elaborate dance with decay and putrefaction. You notice that the alchemist himself shows obvious signs of chronic exposure to his own fermented cosmetics. His skin has a grayish, mottled appearance that he attributes to spiritual transformation, but you recognize as the result of constant contact with decomposing organic matter. His breath smells like rotting fruit, and his hair has developed a greasy, moldy texture that he considers evidence of his cosmetic success. The fermented wine-urine mixture is perhaps the most complex preparation in the laboratory. The alchemist explains that the wine must first be blessed by priests, then mixed with urine from virgin boys, and finally left to ferment in buried clay pots for exactly 1 year. The resulting liquid is so potent that it can only be applied during specific lunar phases to avoid spiritual contamination. Different regions developed their own variations of fermented beauty treatments, each with elaborate justifications for their particular rotting processes. French alchemists preferred fruit fermented in wine cellars, believing that the darkness enhanced the decomposition. German practitioners used milk spoiled in church crypts, thinking that proximity to the dead increased its spiritual potency. Italian scholars fermented their cosmetics in volcanic caves, convinced that the sulfur enhanced their transformative properties. The woman who serves as the alchemist's test subject arrives for her weekly fermented beauty treatment, and you watch in disgust as he begins applying spoiled milk to her face using a brush made from human hair. The milk has chunks of mold and dead insects floating in it, but she endures the treatment with the stoic determination of someone who believes she's participating in cutting-edge beauty science. The really twisted part is that these fermented cosmetics were often given as gifts between scholars and nobility, representing the pinnacle of medieval scientific achievement. Receiving a vial of perfectly fermented fruit essence or expertly spoiled milk was considered a great honor, indicating that the recipient was worthy of the most advanced beauty treatments available. The spoiled honey face mask is the final horror in this laboratory of putrefaction. The honey has been fermenting for 2 years and has developed a black, tar-like consistency filled with dead bees and larvae. The alchemist applies it to his test subject's face in thick layers, explaining that the decomposed bees will transfer their industrious nature to the wearer, while the fermented honey preserves her youth. As the treatment progresses, you realize that this medieval practice of fermented cosmetics represents something even more disturbing than simple beauty enhancement. It's the systematic celebration of decay and putrefaction as pathways to perfection. These alchemists aren't just the Aztec temple pyramid rises into the dawn sky, but your attention is fixed on the horrifying ceremony taking place at its base. You're witnessing the preparation of the most sacred cosmetics in Mesoamerican culture: face paints made from fresh human blood, bone dust from sacrificed warriors, and clay mixed with the ground organs of ritual victims. This isn't just makeup. It's a spiritual transformation that requires the literal incorporation of human sacrifice into beauty. The high priest carefully collects blood from the still warm corpse of a young warrior, explaining that the victim's courage and strength will transfer to whoever wears his life essence on their skin. You watch in horrified fascination as he mixes the blood with sacred red clay from the temple grounds, creating a paint so intensely crimson it seems to pulse with its own heartbeat. But fresh human blood is just one ingredient in this macabre cosmetic arsenal. On the stone altar beside him, you see bowls containing ground human hearts mixed with obsidian dust for eye makeup, human liver paste for lip color, and most disturbing of all, human brain matter mixed with gold dust to create a face paint that supposedly grants divine wisdom. The mainstream historical fact is that Aztec and Mayan cultures used human remains extensively in their ceremonial cosmetics. The quirky detail that most anthropologists prefer to gloss over is that different organs were assigned specific spiritual properties based on their function in the living body. The blood-clay mixture preparation is disturbingly ritualistic. The blood must be collected while the victim is still alive to preserve its spiritual potency, then mixed with clay that has been blessed during specific astronomical alignments. The resulting paint isn't just a cosmetic, it's a direct transfusion of life force from the sacrifice to the living. You notice that the high priestess who regularly wears these blood-based cosmetics has developed an otherworldly appearance that transcends normal human beauty. Her skin seems to glow with an inner light. Her eyes have taken on an intense, almost predatory quality, and her presence radiates a power that makes everyone around her instinctively step back in fear and reverence. Historians still argue whether Mesoamerican peoples viewed human-based cosmetics purely as spiritual practices, or if they recognized practical benefits from using fresh human remains in their beauty routines. Some evidence suggests they believed human blood had superior adhesive and preservation properties compared to animal alternatives, while others indicate the practice was entirely religious in nature. The heart-based eye makeup requires equally elaborate preparation. Fresh human hearts are removed while still beating and immediately ground with obsidian blades to preserve their life force. The resulting paste has a dark red color that's almost black, and when applied around the eyes, it creates an effect that makes the wearer appear to have hollow, shadow-filled sockets that seem to contain infinite depth. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that the human remains used in cosmetics often came from specific types of sacrificial victims chosen for their supposed spiritual qualities. Virgin blood for purity, warrior hearts for courage, child brains for innocence, and elder liver for wisdom. The cosmetics weren't just made from human remains. They were made from carefully selected human sacrifices chosen for their metaphysical properties. The application process is treated as a sacred transformation rather than a simple beauty routine. The blood paint is applied while priests chant prayers to the gods, asking for their blessing and power. The heart paste is dabbed onto specific facial points that correspond to spiritual energy centers. Every aspect of the makeup application is designed to facilitate divine possession and supernatural transformation. You watch as a noble woman prepares for the ceremony by having fresh human blood applied to her face in intricate patterns that tell the story of the day's sacrifices and their spiritual significance. The red paint creates geometric designs that make her appear more like a living embodiment of divine wrath than a human being. She's being transformed into a walking representation of her culture's relationship with death and divine power. The human liver lip color is perhaps the most disturbing element of this cosmetic ritual. Fresh liver from sacrificed victims is ground with aromatic resins and applied to the lips in thick layers that create an unnaturally dark, almost black appearance. The priests explain that this will allow the wearer to speak with the voice of the gods, channeling divine wisdom through her enhanced lips. Different Mesoamerican cultures developed their own variations of human-based cosmetics, each with specific spiritual justifications. Maya women used ground human kidneys mixed with jade dust for face paint that supposedly granted them the ability to see into the spirit world. Olmec priests created cosmetics from human spleen that were believed to enhance magical abilities. Zapotec nobles mixed human stomach contents with precious metals to create cosmetics that granted divine authority. The woman you're watching has been using human-based cosmetics for several years as part of her religious duties, and the psychological effects are becoming increasingly obvious. She moves with the fluid grace of a predator. Her speech has taken on an otherworldly quality, and her eyes seem to look through people rather than at them. The priests interpret this as evidence that she's becoming a living vessel for divine power. The really twisted part is that these human-based cosmetics were often made from people the wearer knew personally. A priestess might wear face paint made from her own child's blood, or lip color rendered from her husband's liver. The cosmetics weren't just spiritual tools. They were intimate connections to specific sacrificed individuals. The preparation of human brain face paint requires special techniques to preserve its spiritual essence. The brain must be removed, while the victim is still conscious to capture their final thoughts and memories. It's then ground with gold dust, and applied to the forehead in patterns that supposedly allow the wearer to access the victim's knowledge and experiences. As the ceremony reaches its climax, you realize that these human-based cosmetics represent something far more disturbing than simple beauty enhancement. They're a systematic incorporation of human sacrifice into daily spiritual practice, transforming living people into walking monuments to ritual murder. The women wearing these cosmetics aren't just beautiful, they're literally embodying the life force of murdered victims. Remember those fermented beauty treatments from medieval laboratories. At least those alchemists were only experimenting with decomposing organic matter. These Aztec priestesses are wearing the fresh remains of human beings who were killed specifically to create their cosmetics, turning beauty routines into acts of ritualized cannibalism. The medieval alchemist's tower laboratory glows with an eerie green light. But it's not magic you're witnessing. It's the systematic attempt to create perfect beauty through dangerous chemical transmutation. You're watching a learned scholar who believes he can transform base metals into cosmetic gold, human flesh into divine perfection, and mortal beauty into something approaching the supernatural. The bubbling retorts and smoking alembics around him contain enough toxic chemicals to poison half the kingdom. He carefully measures out mercury, sulfur, and lead into a glass vessel, explaining that these three substances represent the holy trinity of alchemical transformation. When properly combined and heated, he believes they will create the philosopher's powder, a cosmetic that can grant eternal youth and divine beauty to whoever applies it. You watch in horror as he adds drops of aqua regia, a mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acid, so corrosive it can dissolve gold. But chemical transmutation is just one aspect of his terrifying beauty experiments. In another corner of the laboratory, you see him distilling what he calls virgin's essence, a mixture of young women's tears, menstrual blood, and ground pearls that he's been heating for weeks in a sealed vessel. The resulting liquid glows with an unnatural phosphorescence that he attributes to captured life force. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval alchemists genuinely believed they could create perfect cosmetics through chemical transmutation, often using the same techniques they employed in their attempts to create gold from base metals. The quirky detail that most historians prefer not to discuss is that many of these experiments involved using human subjects as test cases, essentially conducting chemical warfare against women's faces in the name of beauty science. The philosopher's powder preparation is disturbingly complex. The mercury must be heated to exactly the right temperature while being stirred with a rod made from virgin silver. The sulfur must be ground during specific lunar phases to preserve its transformative properties. The lead must be purified through 7 separate distillations, each one removing what the alchemist calls base impurities that would contaminate the final product. You notice that the alchemist himself shows obvious signs of chronic chemical exposure. His skin has taken on a grayish, metallic sheen that he attributes to spiritual transformation, but you recognize as heavy metal poisoning. His hands shake with mercury tremors, his speech is slurred from lead exposure, and his hair has fallen out in patches from acid burns. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists understood the toxic nature of their chemical experiments, or if they genuinely believed that their transmutation processes would neutralize any harmful effects. Some evidence suggests they recognized the dangers, but considered them necessary sacrifices for achieving perfect beauty, while others indicate they viewed chemical poisoning symptoms as signs of successful transformation. The virgin's essence distillation requires even more elaborate procedures. The tears must be collected during moments of pure emotion, preferably fear or sorrow, to capture maximum life force. The menstrual blood must come from women who have never given birth, as childbirth supposedly contaminates the essence. The pearls must be ground using tools made from meteoric iron to preserve their celestial properties. What makes this practice even more disturbing is that the alchemist often uses his own family members as test subjects for his cosmetic experiments. His wife's face bears the scars of numerous chemical burns from failed beauty treatments, but she continues to submit to his experiments because she believes he's on the verge of discovering the secret of eternal beauty. The chemical transmutation process follows elaborate procedures designed to replicate the supposed creation of the universe. The base metals are heated in specific sequences that mirror the alchemical stages of cosmic development. The resulting cosmetics aren't just beauty products, they're attempts to recreate divine creation on a human face. You watch as he demonstrates his latest creation on a wooden mannequin head, applying the philosopher's powder with a brush made from unicorn hair, or at least what he believes is unicorn hair. The powder immediately begins smoking and bubbling on contact with the wood, eating through the surface like acid. He explains that this violent reaction is evidence of the powder's transformative power. The virgin's essence application requires special protective equipment because of its corrosive properties. The alchemist wears leather gloves and a mask made from treated animal hide to protect himself from the toxic vapors. Yet he expects women to apply this same substance directly to their faces, believing that their natural feminine essence will protect them from harm. Different alchemists develop their own variations of chemical cosmetics, each claiming to have discovered the ultimate formula for beauty transmutation. Some used combinations of arsenic and mercury that they called angel's breath. Others created face paints from dissolved silver and gold that they named divine radiance. All of these preparations were essentially sophisticated poison delivery systems disguised as beauty treatments. The woman who serves as his primary test subject arrives for her weekly chemical beauty treatment, and you watch in horror as he begins applying the philosopher's powder to her face. The chemical immediately begins burning her skin, causing her to cry out in pain, but the alchemist assures her that this is evidence the transmutation is working properly. The really twisted part is that these chemical cosmetics were often sold to wealthy nobles as the pinnacle of scientific achievement. Alchemists would present their toxic creations as evidence of their mastery over natural forces, charging enormous sums for cosmetics that were essentially elaborate methods of chemical poisoning. The aqua regia face wash is perhaps the most dangerous element in this chemical beauty arsenal. The alchemist has diluted the acid mixture with rose water and wine, believing this will neutralize its corrosive properties while preserving its transformative power. The resulting solution can dissolve human tissue on contact, but he applies it to his test subject's face with the confidence of someone who believes he's discovered the secret of divine beauty. As the treatment progresses, you realize that this medieval practice of chemical cosmetics represents something even more disturbing than simple beauty enhancement. It's the systematic application of laboratory chemistry to human faces, turning women into unwilling test subjects for dangerous chemical experiments. These alchemists aren't just creating cosmetics, they're conducting chemical warfare against human flesh in the name of beauty science. Remember those sacred human blood cosmetics from Aztec temples? At least those were based on spiritual beliefs about life force and divine power. These medieval alchemists are essentially conducting chemical weapons testing on women's faces, using the same toxic substances they employ in their attempts to transmute base metals into gold. The candlelight flickers across centuries of beauty horrors as you find yourself back in that first Egyptian chamber. But now you see it differently. That woman applying her light-based kohl isn't just following a beauty routine. She's participating in humanity's longest-running experiment in vanity-driven self-destruction. The tremor in her hands isn't just from this morning's application. It's the culmination of thousands of years of human willingness to poison, burn, and mutilate themselves in pursuit of an impossible ideal. You've witnessed the full spectrum of lethal beauty across civilizations and centuries. From crocodile dung sunscreen to human blood face paint, from fermented urine bleach to chemical transmutation experiments, humanity has consistently chosen suffering over acceptance, poison over natural beauty, death over the simple act of existing in their own skin. The mainstream historical fact that emerges from this journey is that every culture, regardless of geography or era, developed its own methods of beauty-based self-harm. The quirky detail that becomes impossible to ignore is that the more dangerous the cosmetic, the more prestigious it became. But as you stand here watching this Egyptian woman complete her deadly morning routine, something profound becomes clear. These weren't isolated incidents of ignorance or primitive superstition. This was a systematic, cross-cultural commitment to the idea that natural human appearance was fundamentally inadequate and required dangerous intervention to become acceptable. The lead kohl that started our journey represents something deeper than simple cosmetic choice. It's evidence of humanity's willingness to trade health for social acceptance, longevity for momentary beauty, and rational thought for cultural conformity. Every civilization we've visited tonight made the same choice. They decided that looking right was worth dying for. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples fully understood the consequences of their beauty choices, but the evidence suggests they often knew exactly what they were doing. Egyptian medical texts describe lead poisoning symptoms. Roman physicians wrote about mercury toxicity. Medieval alchemists documented the effects of chemical burns. Yet the practices continued for centuries, passed down from mother to daughter like precious family traditions. You notice that the Egyptian woman's reflection in her bronze mirror shows not just her lead-enhanced eyes, but the ghostly images of all the women you've encountered tonight. The Victorian lady with her arsenic pallor, the Roman matron with her mercury glow, the medieval nun with her urine-bleached skin, the Renaissance noblewoman with her belladonna-dilated pupils. They're all here, all connected by their shared willingness to embrace beautiful destruction. The really twisted revelation is that none of these practices disappeared because people suddenly became smarter or more informed. They disappeared because fashion changed, because new poisons became available, because different forms of self-destruction became more socially acceptable. The human impulse to harm themselves for beauty never went away. It just found new expressions. What makes this historical journey even more disturbing is the realization that modern cosmetics, for all their safety regulations and scientific testing, still carry echoes of these ancient practices. We still inject toxins into our faces, still apply chemicals that burn and irritate, still pursue beauty standards that require us to alter our natural appearance in fundamental ways. The Egyptian woman finishes her makeup and prepares to face her day, unaware that she's participating in a tradition that spans millennia and crosses all cultural boundaries. Her lead-poisoned reflection represents every woman who ever chose beauty over health, social acceptance over personal safety, cultural conformity over individual survival. As the morning light grows stronger, you begin to see the true horror of what you've witnessed tonight. It wasn't just the individual ingredients, the lead, the mercury, the arsenic, the human blood, the decomposing animal fat. It was the systematic nature of it all, the way every culture independently arrived at the same conclusion, that natural human beauty was insufficient and required dangerous intervention. The Egyptian woman's trembling hands as she puts away her cosmetics aren't just a symptom of lead poisoning. They're a symbol of humanity's shaking relationship with its own appearance. For thousands of years, we've been literally poisoning ourselves rather than accepting what we naturally look like. But perhaps the most disturbing realization is that these ancient beauty practices weren't aberrations or mistakes. They were logical extensions of the same impulses that drive modern beauty culture. The willingness to endure pain for appearance, to risk health for social acceptance, to choose artificial enhancement over natural beauty. These impulses haven't disappeared. They've just become more sophisticated. The candlelight begins to dim as dawn approaches, and you realize that this journey through beauty's deadly history isn't really about the past at all. It's about understanding the present, about recognizing that the same forces that drove Egyptian women to paint their eyes with lead are still operating today, just with different tools and different poisons. The Egyptian woman takes one last look in her mirror, satisfied with her lead-enhanced appearance, unaware that she's shortened her life for the sake of a beauty standard that will seem ridiculous to future generations. But then again, future generations will probably be pursuing their own forms of beautiful self-destruction, convinced that their methods are more enlightened than those that came before. As you prepare to leave this chamber of ancient beauty horrors, you carry with you the knowledge that humanity's relationship with appearance has always been fundamentally toxic. We've spent millennia proving that we'd rather die beautiful than live naturally, and that's perhaps the most disturbing beauty secret of all. The tremor in the Egyptian woman's hands grows more pronounced as the lead continues its slow work, but she doesn't notice. She's too busy admiring her reflection, too satisfied with her enhanced appearance to worry about the price she's paying. The ancient chamber grows quiet now, the last echoes of our journey fading like whispers in the darkness. You've traveled through millennia of human vanity, witnessed civilizations rise and fall while their people slowly poisoned themselves in pursuit of impossible beauty. The Egyptian woman's trembling hands have stilled, her lead-enhanced eyes finally closed, her story joining the countless others who chose beauty over breath, appearance over existence. But here, in this gentle darkness, you can let go of those horrors. The crocodile dung and fermented urine, the human blood and decomposing fat, the mercury and arsenic and lead. They're all just memories now, fading like old nightmares in the morning light. Your own reflection, unmarked by toxic cosmetics, untainted by lethal beauty standards, is perfect exactly as it is. Feel your breathing slow and deepen. Your skin, free from lead and mercury, from ash and acid, from all the poisons that humans have smeared upon themselves across the centuries. Your eyes, undilated by belladonna, unburned by chemical experiments, seeing clearly in the soft darkness. Your lips, unstained by cinnabar or human blood, speaking only truth and kindness. The ancient beauty secrets we've uncovered tonight were never really about beauty at all. They were about fear, about the desperate human need to transform ourselves into something we thought was more acceptable. But you don't need transformation. You don't need poison or pain or the approval of civilizations that have crumbled to dust. Rest now, knowing that the greatest beauty secret of all is the simplest one. You are enough exactly as you are. No lead required, no mercury needed, no human sacrifice necessary. Just you breathing softly in the darkness, perfect and whole and beautifully, wonderfully alive. Sleep well and dream of clear skin and clear conscience, of beauty that heals rather than harms,